That night, she begged her billionaire best friend to take her virginity. Now he wouldn't let go. You're mine now. Hi family, welcome back to your one and only Dr. Tom's Love Tales, where stories of love and destiny come alive. Oh, how I've missed your beautiful energy and presence. How have you all been since our last adventure together? I hope life has been treating you kindly and filling your days with joy. Every time I sit down to share these stories with you, I feel like I'm coming home to the most wonderful people in the world. Your comments and messages always bring the biggest smile to my face. It feels so good to be back with you today. I'm your host, Dr. Tom, and before we begin this journey together, I want to know who's with me today. Type present in the comments so I can welcome you personally. Let me see that roll call light up. It truly makes my day to see your names appear. And while you're at it, let me know which season you were born in. Winter, spring, summer, or fall. I have a special insight to share with you at the end of our story that relates to your season. It's something I've been reflecting on lately, about how the time we come into this world shapes certain aspects of our character, and I think you'll find it fascinating. Now, grab your favorite drink. For me, I've got my Arnold Palmer right here, and get comfortable. Maybe light that candle you've been saving for a special occasion. Turn down the lights. Create your perfect listening atmosphere, because this story is going to take you on an emotional journey you won't forget so soon. Let's begin. Julia Campbell possessed the kind of determination that could move mountains and the intelligence that could light up the darkest courtroom. At 27, she had achieved what most lawyers only dream of. She worked at Harrison Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, where partnerships were earned through blood, sweat, and countless 18-hour days. Her corner office on the 32nd floor overlooked Boston Harbor, a constant reminder of how far she'd climbed from her modest childhood neighborhood. Julia's colleagues respected her razor-sharp mind and her ability to dissect the most complex legal cases with surgical precision. She was known for arriving first and leaving last, her desk lamp often the only light glowing in the entire office building at midnight. The senior partners had already whispered about her potential for partnership before 30, an achievement that would make her one of the youngest partners in the firm's 100-year history. But success came with sacrifices that Julia rarely spoke about. While her law school friends were getting married and starting families, Julia's calendar was filled with depositions, client meetings, and court appearances. Her personal life had become a series of canceled dinner dates and relationships that withered under the pressure of her career demands. She told herself that love could wait, that building her legal career was the foundation everything else would rest upon. Yet beneath her professional confidence lay a vulnerability that few people ever witnessed. Julia had developed walls around her heart, built brick by brick through years of choosing ambition over intimacy. The few men who had tried to get close to her found themselves competing with legal briefs and case law for her attention. When relationships reached the point where deeper intimacy was expected, Julia would find reasons to pull away, convincing herself that she wasn't ready, that her career needed to come first. Deep down, Julia carried a fear that she rarely acknowledged, a fear of being truly known by someone and found lacking. What if she opened her heart completely and discovered that she wasn't enough? What if vulnerability led to disappointment? These questions haunted her quiet moments, the spaces between court cases and client calls, where her mind wandered to what might be missing from her carefully constructed life. Meanwhile, miles away there was Jordan Brooks, a man whose story proved that humble beginnings don't determine your destination. At 31, Jordan had transformed himself from the son of a hard-working construction worker into one of New England's most successful real estate developers. His father, Robert Brooks, had spent 30 years building other people's dreams with his hands, coming home each night with dirt under his fingernails and pride in his heart for honest work well done. Jordan never forgot those lessons about hard work and integrity. He started his real estate journey with a single rundown property in South Boston, a neighborhood that reminded him of where he came from. While other developers focused on luxury markets, Jordan saw potential in forgotten communities. He would buy neglected buildings, restore them with care, and transform entire neighborhoods into thriving communities where families could build their futures. His business empire now stretched across New England, with luxury developments from Boston to Burlington, Vermont. Jordan's company was known not just for beautiful buildings, but for treating construction workers fairly and maintaining affordable housing options in every development. The boy who used to help his father carry tools had become a man who created homes for thousands of families. But Jordan carried a secret that he'd guarded for over a decade. He was completely, hopelessly in love with Julia Campbell. This love had grown quietly in the shadows of their friendship, taking root when they were 17 and strengthening with every passing year. He'd watched her date other men, celebrated her victories, and comforted her through heartbreaks, all while keeping his true feelings locked away in the deepest chambers of his heart. Every week, Jordan and Julia maintained a tradition that kept them grounded in their shared history. Thursday nights meant pizza from Tony's Corner Shop, the same place where they'd spent their allowance money as kids, eaten in Jordan's luxury penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. These evenings were sacred to both of them, a reminder that despite their success, they were still the same kids who'd grown up dreaming of bigger worlds. During these weekly gatherings, they would shed their professional personas. Julia would kick off her designer heels and curl up on Jordan's oversized couch, while Jordan would trade his tailored suits for jeans and the old Patriots t-shirt he'd owned since college. They'd talk about everything and nothing: client frustrations, family updates, childhood memories, and dreams for the future. The foundation of their relationship was built on 18 years of unwavering trust and shared experiences. They'd first met at 9 years old in Riverside Park, the neighborhood playground where Julia's family had moved after her father's job transfer. Julia had been sitting alone on the swings, looking overwhelmed by the prospect of starting at a new school, when Jordan approached with the kind of fearless kindness that only children possess. "Want to play on the monkey bars?" he'd asked, extending a dirt-smudged hand. That simple invitation became the beginning of a friendship that would weather every storm life threw with them. During high school, Jordan became Julia's fiercest protector and most loyal supporter. When the popular girls made cruel comments about Julia's secondhand clothes or her academic scholarship, Jordan would step in with a quiet confidence that shut down their cruelty. He'd sneak out of his bedroom window, climbing down the old oak tree in his yard, whenever Julia called upset about some teenage crisis. Those late-night conversations on park benches and playground swings created a bond deeper than romance. They created an unshakable trust. College took them in different directions: Julia to Boston University Law School and Jordan to Northeastern for business. But distance only strengthened their connection. They called each other through exam stress, celebrated each other's achievements, and provided comfort during the inevitable challenges of building their careers. Through every relationship Julia attempted and every business deal Jordan closed, they remained each other's constant, the one person who truly understood the journey they'd both traveled from that neighborhood park to their current success. Now, at 27 and 31 respectively, they had achieved everything they'd dreamed of as children. But sometimes, the greatest achievements create the deepest longings, and both Julia and Jordan were about to discover that some desires, though ignored, can reach its peak. Julia's professional life was a masterpiece of success, but her romantic life read like a series of unfinished novels promising beginnings that never reached their conclusions. In the past 3 years, she dated David, a fellow attorney who possessed all the right credentials on paper. He was intelligent, ambitious, and understood the demands of legal work. Their relationship had progressed naturally through dinner dates, weekend trips, and long conversations about their shared career goals. But when David began hinting at deeper intimacy, something inside Julia would freeze. She'd find excuses: an important case, a looming deadline, fatigue from long court days. Eventually, David grew frustrated with what he perceived as emotional unavailability. and their relationship ended with him saying words that still echoed in Julia's mind. "You're never really present with me, Julia. It's like you're always holding something back." Then came Robert, a successful financial advisor who pursued Julia with romantic persistence. He sent flowers to her office, planned elaborate weekend getaways, and spoke openly about his desire for marriage and family. Robert represented everything Julia thought she should want: stability, success, and genuine affection. Yet when their relationship reached the same crossroads of physical intimacy, Julia felt that familiar wall rising between her heart and her body. The pattern repeated with Thomas, a judge's son who understood the legal world intimately. With each relationship, Julia found herself going through the motions of romance without ever feeling truly connected. She could discuss legal strategies for hours, debate constitutional law with passion, and command a courtroom with confidence, but when it came to surrendering herself completely to another person, she felt lost and vulnerable in ways that terrified her. Julia began to notice her colleagues settling into marriages and partnerships while she remained perpetually single. Her law school friend Catherine had recently married and was pregnant with her first child. Her colleague Amanda had just gotten engaged to a doctor she'd met through mutual friends. During firm social events, Julia found herself surrounded by couples, feeling increasingly like an outsider looking in on a world she couldn't seem to enter. Late at night in her apartment, Julia would lie awake questioning her choices. Was she broken somehow? Was her dedication to her career making her incapable of love? She'd built walls so high around her heart that she wondered if anyone could ever scale them. The fear of vulnerability had become a prison of her own making, and she wasn't sure she knew how to escape. But there was one person who had never made her feel the need to build walls. One person whose presence brought peace instead of anxiety, comfort instead of fear. When Julia was honest with herself during those sleepless nights, she admitted that Jordan was the only man who had ever made her feel completely safe. With him, she could be entirely herself, ambitious, driven, sometimes fragile, always real. The question that began forming in her mind was both simple and terrifying. What if the person she'd been searching for had been beside her all along? That Thursday evening in Jordan's penthouse felt different from the moment Julia walked through the door. The familiar comfort of Tony's pizza and their shared couch couldn't ease the nervous energy coursing through her body. She'd been rehearsing words all week, practicing conversations in her bathroom mirror, working up the courage for something that could change everything between them. Jordan noticed immediately that something was different. Julia kept adjusting her blazer, a nervous habit he'd observed since their high school days when she had to present in front of the class. She picked at her pizza instead of eating it, and her usual easy conversation felt stilted and careful. "Julia, what's going on?" Jordan asked, setting down his slice and giving her his full attention. "You seem like you're carrying the weight of the world tonight." Julia took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her own food. "Jordan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise me that no matter what I say, it won't make things weird between us." The seriousness in her voice made Jordan's heart race. They'd shared secrets, dreams, and fears for 18 years, but something about this moment felt monumentally different. "You know you can tell me anything, Julie. What's happening?" Julia stood up from the couch and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, the same harbor they'd watched ships navigate as children from the much humbler vantage point of the neighborhood pier. "I'm 27 years old, Jordan, and I've never been intimate with anyone." Jordan felt the world shift beneath him. He'd suspected as much from conversations over the years, but hearing her say it directly made his chest tighten with protective tenderness. "I've had opportunities," Julia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've dated good men who wanted to be with me. But every time things reached that point, I would panic. I couldn't trust them enough to be that vulnerable. Except," she turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "There's one person I've always felt completely safe with. One person who has never made me feel like I need to be anyone other than exactly who I am." Understanding dawned on Jordan's face, followed immediately by something that looked like panic mixed with longing. His mind raced back through years of hidden feelings, of watching her date other men while dying inside, of loving her so completely that it had become part of his identity. "Julia, what are you asking me?" His voice was rough with emotion he'd spent over a decade learning to control. "I'm asking you to be my first," she said quietly, the words hanging in the air between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were ready to cross. "Not because I expect anything romantic afterward, but because you're the only person I trust completely. You've known me since we were children. You've seen me at my worst, and celebrated me at my best. You're my safety, Jordan." Jordan stood abruptly and walked to the windows, his broad shoulders tense with the weight of her words. The confession he'd buried for so long threatened to burst from his chest. "This isn't like asking me to review a contract, Julia. This would change everything between us." "Maybe," she admitted, joining him at the window. "But Jordan, I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of waiting for some perfect stranger when the person I trust most is standing right here." Jordan turned to face her, his dark eyes intense with years of suppressed emotion. "You don't understand what you're asking," he said quietly. "I've been in love with you since we were 17 years old, Julia. I've spent 14 years being your best friend, cheering you on from the sidelines, and pretending that watching you date other men didn't tear me apart inside." Julia felt her breath catch, the world reshaping itself around his words. "What? Remember when you dated David in law school? I flew to Boston every time you needed me, celebrating your successes like they were my own victories, comforting you through every heartbreak, while keeping my feelings locked away because I valued our friendship too much to risk losing it." The confession hung between them, years of hidden truth finally exposed to light. Julia reached for his hand, her own trembling as she processed everything he'd just revealed. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I never wanted you to know. You made it clear early on that we were friends, and I learned to hide my feelings so well that even I sometimes forgot they were there. But Julia, if we cross this line, if I touch you the way I've dreamed about for 14 years, I won't be able to pretend anymore." Julia squeezed his hand, her heart racing as pieces of her life suddenly clicked into place. "What if I told you that maybe I don't want you to go back to pretending? What if the reason I could never give my heart to anyone else is because it was already yours and I was just too focused on everything else to see it?" 4 days passed between their life-changing conversation and the evening that would alter the course of their relationship forever. Julia had suggested they meet at the Lenox Hotel in Back Bay, a boutique establishment known for its discretion and elegance. The choice felt right, somewhere beautiful and private, away from their usual spaces, where they could approach this moment with the reverence it deserved. Julia arrived first, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her dress in the elevator mirror. She'd chosen something simple but beautiful, a deep blue dress that Jordan had once complimented, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. Everything about this evening felt monumental, like standing at the edge of a cliff before taking a leap that would either let her fly or change her forever. When Jordan knocked on the door, Julia's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened it to find him holding a single white rose, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous vulnerability that made him look younger, more like the boy who used to climb through her bedroom window to comfort her after nightmares. "Hi," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 14 years of hidden longing. "Hi," she replied, accepting the rose and stepping aside to let him enter. The room was elegant but understated, with soft lighting that cast warm shadows across the cream-colored walls. Jordan had ensured every detail was perfect: champagne chilling in an ice bucket, soft music playing from a speaker, and an atmosphere of safety that only he could create for her. They sat together on the edge of the bed, both nervous, but anchored by the deep trust they'd built over nearly 2 decades. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Jordan asked, his hands gently framing her face. The question carried layers of meaning, not just about the physical act, but about crossing a threshold they could never uncross. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Julia replied, and the truth of those words resonated through every fiber of her being. What followed was tender and overwhelming in ways neither had anticipated. Jordan approached every moment with reverence, making sure Julia felt cherished rather than rushed. His hands were gentle, his kisses patient, and his attention completely focused on her comfort and pleasure. For Julia, it was a revelation. This was what intimacy was supposed to feel like. Not the anxious vulnerability she'd experienced with other men, but a complete sense of safety combined with desire. But as the night progressed, something began to shift in Jordan's carefully maintained restraint. The walls he'd built around his feelings for 14 years didn't just crack, they completely crumbled. Years of suppressed longing poured out of him like water through a broken dam. "Julia," he whispered against her skin, his voice raw with emotion, "I love you. I'm so completely in love with you that it's consuming every part of me. You have no idea how long I've dreamed of this moment." The intensity of his devotion awakened something in Julia she'd never experienced. This wasn't just about losing her virginity anymore. It was about discovering a love so profound it redefined everything she thought she knew about herself and what she was capable of feeling. In Jordan's arms, she felt beautiful, desired, and completely known in ways that went far beyond the physical. They made love throughout the night, each encounter deepening their connection but also revealing the dangerous intensity of Jordan's feelings. Julia could see something shifting in his eyes, a possessiveness that both thrilled and concerned her. When he looked at her, it was as if she'd become his entire universe, the center around which everything else revolved. "You're mine now," he murmured during one of their quiet moments, his arms tightening around her. "After tonight, you belong to me completely." Julia felt a flutter of unease at his words, but the overwhelming emotions of the evening pushed her concerns aside. She attributed his intensity to the newness of their relationship, the culmination of years of hidden feelings finally being expressed. Morning arrived too quickly, streaming through the hotel windows and casting everything in golden light. Julia lay in Jordan's arms, feeling changed in fundamental ways. She was no longer the woman who'd walked into this room the night before. She was someone who'd experienced true intimacy, who'd discovered that love could be both powerful and safe. But when Julia began to stir, reaching for her phone to check the time, Jordan's arms tightened around her possessively. "Don't," he said, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Stay here with me. Cancel whatever you have planned today." Julia glanced at her phone and saw several missed calls from her office. "Jordan, I have a deposition preparation this morning. The Henderson case could make my career if I handle it right. How can you think about work after what we shared?" His voice carried an intensity that both thrilled and worried her. "Julia, you're everything to me now. Nothing else should matter." Julia sat up, reaching for her dress. Of course last night mattered. It was incredible, and it changed everything between us. But I still have responsibilities. I still have a career that's important to me. Jordan's expression darkened in a way that made Julia pause. "More important than this? More important than us?" "That's not what I said," Julia replied carefully, sensing dangerous territory. "But Jordan, one night together doesn't mean I abandon everything else in my life." "It does for me," he said quietly, sitting up and pulling her back down beside him. "Julia, I've waited 14 years for you. I've built my entire life around being there for you. Now that you're finally mine, I don't want to share you with anyone or anything else." Julia felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. The man holding her looked like Jordan, sounded like Jordan, but something fundamental had shifted overnight. The careful balance he'd maintained between love and friendship had been destroyed, replaced by something much more intense and possessive. "Jordan, you're scaring me a little," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm not trying to scare you," he replied, his grip on her wrist gentling but not releasing. "I'm trying to love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely, without reservation, without competing with depositions and court cases for your attention." Julia managed to free herself and stand up, her mind racing as she processed the change in him. "I need to go home and get ready for work. We can talk about this tonight." But as she moved toward her clothes, Jordan's expression became desperate, almost panicked. "Julia, please, don't leave yet. Call in sick, tell them you're not feeling well. Spend the day with me instead." And in that moment, Julia realized that the beautiful night they'd shared had awakened something in Jordan that might be impossible to control. The first week after their night together, Julia's office became a garden. Every morning brought fresh arrangements: white roses on Monday, pink peonies on Tuesday, exotic orchids by Wednesday. Her assistant, Karen, initially smiled at the romantic gestures, commenting on how lucky Julia was to have found such a devoted man. But by Friday, when a massive arrangement of lilies arrived during an important client meeting, Karen's expression had shifted to concern. "Miss Campbell, should I ask the delivery services to space these out more?" Karen asked diplomatically, gesturing to the 5 arrangements that now crowded Julia's office space. Julia's phone buzzed constantly throughout those first days. Jordan's texts arrived every 30 minutes like clockwork. "Good morning, beautiful. Thinking of you. How's your case prep going? You're amazing. Can't wait to see you tonight. Missing you already, even though I just left you an hour ago." Initially, Julia found his attention flattering. After years of dating men who seemed perpetually distracted by their own careers, Jordan's focused devotion felt wonderful. But as the texts increased in frequency and intensity, she began to feel suffocated. By Thursday of that first week, her phone had received 47 messages from Jordan before noon. During their traditional Thursday pizza night, Jordan seemed different, more intense, more possessive. He sat closer to her on the couch, his arm around her shoulders in a grip that felt more controlling than comforting. When Julia mentioned an upcoming networking event with other attorneys, his expression darkened immediately. "Why do you need to network?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge. "You already have the best position in the city. These people are just using you to advance their own careers." "It's part of building my practice," Julia explained patiently. "Building relationships in the legal community is essential for—" "You don't need them," Jordan interrupted, his arm tightening around her. "You have everything you need right here. You have me." The second week brought escalations that made Julia's colleagues take notice. Jordan began appearing at her office building during lunch hours, waiting in the lobby with gourmet meals from Boston's finest restaurants. On Tuesday, he arrived during a partners' meeting, insisting that Julia needed to eat properly and couldn't survive on coffee and vending machine snacks. "Mr. Brooks," the building's security guard had to explain, "Miss Campbell is in a closed meeting. I can't interrupt her for lunch deliveries. She needs to take care of herself," Jordan replied, his voice carrying an authority that made the guard uncomfortable. "Her health is more important than any meeting." When Julia finally emerged from the conference room 3 hours later, she found Jordan still waiting, the elaborate lunch now cold and forgotten. His presence in her professional space felt like an invasion, a crossing of boundaries they'd never needed to discuss before. "Jordan, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice low as curious colleagues watched from the elevator bank. "I was worried about you," he said, standing and reaching for her hands. "You've been working 18-hour days. Someone needs to make sure you're taking care of yourself." "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own health and schedule," Julia replied, aware that senior partner Janet Morrison was observing their interaction with keen interest. Week 3 brought the breaking point with Julia's law school friends. Rachel and Christina had invited her to their monthly dinner at a trendy South End restaurant, a tradition they'd maintained since graduation. When Julia told Jordan about the plans, his reaction was immediate and intense. "You're choosing them over me?" he asked, his voice filled with hurt and anger. "After everything we've shared, you'd rather spend Friday night with people who barely know the real you?" "They're my friends, Jordan. I've known Rachel since our first year of law school. These dinners are important to me." "I'm important to you," he replied, his hands gripping her shoulders. "What we have is more important than some superficial friendship dinner. Cancel it. Stay with me instead." Julia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I'm not canceling plans with my friends. That's not healthy in any relationship." "Healthy," Jordan's voice rose. "What's healthy is prioritizing the person you love over people who don't really understand you. When did Rachel comfort you through your father's heart attack? When did Christina fly across the country to help you move? I did those things. I'm the one who knows you." The argument continued for an hour, with Jordan becoming increasingly agitated every time Julia insisted on maintaining her friendships. She ended up going to dinner, but the evening was ruined by constant texts from Jordan expressing his disappointment and hurt. The professional interference reached crisis levels during Julia's 4th week of navigating Jordan's new behavior. She was presenting a motion in Suffolk County Superior Court when her phone, which she'd forgotten to silence, buzzed with an urgent call. The judge paused the proceedings while Julia frantically silenced the device, her face burning with professional embarrassment. Later that day, gourmet catering arrived during a crucial strategy meeting with the senior partners. The delivery team insisted they had specific instructions to interrupt any meeting to ensure Miss Campbell received her nutrition. Julia watched in horror as Janet Morrison's expression shifted from confusion to concern, as expensive seafood dishes were arranged around their conference table. But the absolute breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon when Julia's assistant buzzed her intercom with panic in her voice. "Miss Campbell, there's a gentleman on line 2 claiming to be your boyfriend. He says he's concerned about your working hours and wants to speak with someone about your schedule." Julia's blood turned to ice. "Transfer him to my direct line." "Jordan, what did you just do?" she asked the moment she picked up. "I called to make sure you're not overworking yourself," he replied, his tone suggesting he saw nothing wrong with his actions. 18-hour days aren't healthy, Julia. I asked them to make sure you go home at reasonable hours. You called my workplace to discuss my schedule." Julia's voice was deadly quiet. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? I was protecting you. You were controlling me." Julia exploded, her professional composure finally cracking. "Jordan, you just made me look like a woman who can't manage her own career, who needs her boyfriend to call her office like she's a child." 20 minutes later, Janet Morrison knocked on Julia's door. The senior partner's expression was carefully neutral, but Julia could read the concern in her eyes. "Julia, do you have a moment to chat?" Janet closed the door behind her and took a seat across from Julia's desk. "I've noticed some changes lately. Your focus seems divided, and now we're getting calls from concerned boyfriends. Is everything all right?" Julia felt her carefully constructed professional image crumbling. "I'm handling a personal situation that's gotten complicated. Sounds like someone's confused about boundaries," Janet observed with her characteristic directness. "Personal relationships shouldn't interfere with professional environments, ever." That evening, Julia confronted Jordan in his penthouse, her anger barely contained. "You called my workplace today. You actually called Harrison and Associates to discuss my working hours. I was worried about you," Jordan said defensively, standing from his desk where he'd been reviewing property contracts. "Those partners work you to death. Someone needs to advocate for your well-being. That's not your decision to make." Julia's voice shook with professional mortification and personal betrayal. "Do you understand what you've done? You've made me look incompetent to the senior partners, like I'm some fragile woman who can't handle the demands of law." "Maybe you can't," Jordan said quietly, and Julia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What did you just say?" Jordan moved toward her, his expression softening as he realized his mistake. "I didn't mean it like that. I just think maybe you're pushing yourself too hard. Maybe you should consider other options." "Other options?" "Work with me," Jordan said, his eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration. "Leave Harrison and Associates and help me run the real estate business. We could be partners in everything, Julia. Think about how amazing that would be." Julia stared at him in complete shock. "You want me to give up everything I've worked for? I've spent 7 years building my legal career. I'm 2 years away from making partner at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. And you want me to throw that away to be your business assistant?" "Not assistant," Jordan said quickly, horror replacing the enthusiasm on his face as he realized how his suggestion sounded. "Partner. Equal partner. Julia, that's not what I meant. But it's exactly what you said." Julia's voice was ice-cold with fury. "You want me to abandon my dreams to support yours, just like every other man who's ever tried to diminish my ambitions." "Julia, please, no." She grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. "I need time to think about who you've become. Because the Jordan I fell in love with would never ask me to give up my dreams. He would celebrate them." As Julia left his penthouse that night, she realized that the beautiful love story she'd thought they were writing had become something else entirely. A cautionary tale about how love without respect could transform into something dangerous. The final confrontation happened 3 days later in Jordan's penthouse office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Boston harbor that had once symbolized their shared dreams. Julia stood in the center of the room, her posture straight and commanding, the same stance she used when addressing a jury. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of someone who had spent years learning to be heard in rooms full of powerful men. "This isn't love, Jordan. This is possession." The words cut through the air with surgical precision. "You've confused owning someone with loving them, and I won't be owned by anyone, not even you." Jordan's face crumpled with desperate emotion. He moved toward her, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture that would have broken her heart just weeks earlier. "Everything I do is because I love you, Julia. Every call, every visit, every attempt to protect you, it all comes from love. How can you not see that?" "No," Julia replied, her courtroom training keeping her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Love means wanting someone to succeed and flourish, even if it means less time together. Love means trusting them to make their own choices and supporting their dreams, not trying to replace those dreams with your own vision of what's best for them." Jordan sank into his desk chair, the weight of her words hitting him like physical blows. "But I can't lose you. I waited 14 years for you, Julia. I built my entire life around being there for you. I don't know how to exist without you being the center of everything." "That's exactly the problem," Julia said softly, her anger giving way to sadness. "You made me the center of your universe, instead of building a life alongside mine. That's not love, Jordan. That's dependence, and it's suffocating me." Julia moved toward the door, her decision crystallizing with each step. "I'm going to stay with Janet Morrison while I figure out my next steps. So don't even try to come see me. I need space to think clearly, and you need time to understand what you've become." "Julia, please." Jordan stood quickly, desperation making his voice crack. "Don't leave. We can work through this. I'll try to give you more space. You'll what? Call my office less? Send fewer flowers? Jordan, you suggested I abandon my legal career to be your business partner. You called my workplace to monitor my hours. This isn't about minor adjustments. This is about fundamental respect for who I am and what I've worked to build. The door closed behind Julia with a soft click that seemed to echo through Jordan's penthouse like a gunshot. For the first time in 14 years, Julia Campbell walked away from Jordan Brooks, and the silence she left behind was deafening. What followed were 3 weeks that tested every relationship in their shared social circle. Jordan's behavior became increasingly erratic as the reality of losing Julia set in. He sent flowers to Janet Morrison's house where Julia was staying, massive arrangements that arrived daily despite Julia's requests for him to stop. The delivery drivers began to recognize the address, their expressions sympathetic as they carried yet another elaborate display of roses, lilies, and orchids to the doorstep. The handwritten letters came next, pages and pages of Jordan's thoughts, memories, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. He wrote about their childhood friendship, their high school adventures, every moment that had led to their current crisis. The letters arrived twice daily, sometimes more, filled with promises to change and declarations of love that grew more intense with each passing day. Their mutual friends found themselves caught in an impossible situation. Rachel and Christina rallied around Julia, horrified by Jordan's controlling behavior and offering unwavering support. But Jordan had friends too, business associates and college buddies, who saw his pain and couldn't understand why Julia wouldn't give him another chance. "He's always been crazy about you," Julia's law school friend David told her during a phone call. "Maybe he just got overwhelmed when you finally got together. Can't you work it out?" "David, he called my law firm to monitor my working hours," Julia replied wearily. "Would you tolerate that from someone you were dating?" The community began taking sides, creating an uncomfortable dynamic at social gatherings that both Julia and Jordan had once enjoyed. Their favorite restaurants, the charity events they'd attended together, even their old neighborhood became minefields of divided loyalties and whispered conversations. Jordan's business began suffering as his emotional chaos bled into his professional life. His assistant Linda watched with growing concern as he missed important client meetings, forgot to return calls, and spent hours staring out his office windows instead of reviewing property contracts. The man who had built a real estate empire through careful attention to detail and relationship building was falling apart. "Mr. Brooks," Linda finally said during a particularly difficult week, "perhaps you should consider taking some time off. The Martinez deal fell through because you missed the closing meeting, and the investors for the waterfront project are asking questions." Jordan looked at her as if seeing her for the first time in days. "I can't concentrate on anything else, Linda. Nothing matters without her." It was Linda who gently suggested that perhaps professional help might provide the clarity he needed. "My brother went through something similar during his divorce," she said carefully. "Talking to someone helped him understand his patterns and learn healthier ways to cope." The moment of clarity came on a rainy Thursday evening when Jordan found himself sitting in his car outside Julia's old apartment building, realizing he'd driven there without conscious thought. He'd been hoping to catch a glimpse of her, even though he knew she was staying with Janet. The recognition of his own behavior hit him like a physical blow. He was becoming a stalker, the kind of man he would have protected Julia from in their teenage years. That night, Jordan sat in his empty penthouse and made the most important decision of his adult life. He picked up his phone and composed a simple text message. "I'm getting professional help. You deserve better than what I became. I'm learning to love you the right way." He sent the message and then turned off his phone, understanding for the first time that real love sometimes meant stepping back, even when every instinct screamed to hold on tighter. The man who had spent 14 years learning to hide his feelings now had to learn something much harder: how to love without controlling, how to support without suffocating, and how to rebuild himself from the ground up. For the first time in 3 weeks, Julia read a message from Jordan that gave her hope instead of fear. It was the first sign that her best friend might still exist somewhere beneath the possessive stranger he had become. Dr. Patricia Reynolds had been practicing psychology for 25 years, but she rarely encountered patients as motivated for change as Jordan Brooks. He arrived at her Cambridge office that first Tuesday morning carrying a thick folder of handwritten notes. Every interaction with Julia he could remember. Every moment he'd felt the urge to control rather than support. Every pattern he wanted to understand and break. "I need to understand what I became," Jordan said during their initial session, his usual confidence replaced by raw vulnerability. The woman I love most in the world had to run from me because I turned into someone she couldn't recognize. I need to know how that happened and how to make sure it never happens again." Dr. Reynolds recognized the signs immediately: attachment anxiety, control patterns, and fear of abandonment that had likely been building for decades. Over the first month of weekly sessions, she helped Jordan trace the roots of his behavior back to childhood experiences he'd buried so deeply he'd forgotten they existed. The breakthrough came during their 6th session, when Dr. Reynolds asked Jordan to describe his parents' relationship. His father, Robert Brooks, had been a hard-working construction foreman who came home each evening exhausted and irritable. Jordan's mother, Linda, had been a gentle woman who seemed to shrink smaller each year, her own dreams and opinions gradually disappearing under her husband's need to control every aspect of their household. "Your father monitored your mother's activities?" Dr. Reynolds asked gently. "Every phone call, every friend, every dollar she spent," Jordan replied, the memories flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. "He said it was because he loved her, because he wanted to protect her. He'd get upset if she was late coming home from the grocery store, if she talked too long with neighbors, if she expressed opinions that differed from his." "And how did that make you feel as a child?" Jordan was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists. "I hated him for it. I promised myself I'd never treat a woman that way. I used to sneak out of the house just to escape the tension, to get away from watching my mother disappear piece by piece." The irony hit him like a physical blow. "I became exactly what I hated most," he whispered. Dr. Reynolds nodded compassionately. "Children often repeat patterns they witnessed, even when they consciously reject them. The neural pathways for love and control got crossed in your developing brain. When you finally had Julia, your deepest fear was losing her. So you unconsciously adopted your father's controlling behaviors because they were the only model you had for keeping someone close." The work that followed was grueling. Jordan had to examine every interaction with Julia, identifying moments when love had transformed into possession. He learned about healthy boundaries, emotional regulation, and the difference between supporting someone and controlling them. Dr. Reynolds taught him communication techniques, helped him develop strategies for managing his anxiety, and guided him through the process of rebuilding his sense of self-worth outside of his relationship with Julia. 8 months of intensive therapy transformed Jordan in ways that surprised even him. He developed friendships outside of Julia for the first time in years, rediscovered hobbies he'd abandoned, and threw himself into his real estate business with renewed focus. The company that had suffered during his emotional crisis began thriving again as Jordan channeled his energy into creating affordable housing projects that honored his father's work ethic while breaking the cycle of his father's emotional patterns. The day Jordan decided to approach Julia again, he waited nervously by her car in the parking garage beneath the Suffolk County Courthouse. She'd just won a major motion in a high-profile case. He'd seen the news coverage and felt the familiar surge of pride in her accomplishments. But this time, the pride wasn't mixed with possessiveness or the need to insert himself into her success. Julia emerged from the courthouse elevator looking radiant with victory, her briefcase in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke excitedly with what sounded like a colleague. When she saw Jordan leaning against her car, she stopped abruptly, her expression cycling through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope. "Hi, Julia," Jordan said softly, making no move to approach her. "Congratulations on the Morrison case. I saw the news coverage. Your argument was brilliant." Julia studied his face carefully, noting changes that 8 months had brought. He looked different, more grounded, less desperate, with an air of quiet confidence that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with, rather than the possessive stranger he'd become. "What are you doing here, Jordan?" "I wanted you to know that I understand now," he said simply. "I understand what I became, why it happened, and how badly I betrayed your trust. I'm not here to ask for anything except the chance to tell you that I'm sorry, and that you were right about everything." Julia felt her guard lowering slightly. "You've been getting help?" Jordan nodded. 8 months of therapy. I learned about patterns I inherited from my father, about how my fear of losing you turned me into someone who tried to own you instead of love you. I learned that the kind of love I was offering wasn't love at all. It was control disguised as devotion. They talked for 20 minutes in that parking garage, a careful conversation that felt nothing like their old easy intimacy but carried the possibility of something healthier. Jordan made no demands, expressed no expectations, and asked for nothing except her willingness to consider rebuilding their friendship slowly. "I don't know if we can ever be what we were," Julia said honestly. I don't want to be what we were, Jordan replied. I want to learn how to be your friend again, properly this time, and if that's all we ever are, I'll consider myself lucky to have that much. The rebuilding process was painstakingly slow. Coffee meetings in public places, group gatherings with mutual friends, carefully structured interactions that allowed both of them to practice new patterns. Jordan learned to celebrate Julia's professional victories without trying to insert himself into them. Julia learned to communicate her boundaries clearly and immediately, rather than letting resentment build. Dr. Reynolds helped Jordan understand that his transformation wasn't just about winning Julia back. It was about becoming a man capable of healthy relationships with anyone. Julia, meanwhile, began her own therapy sessions to process the trauma of loving someone who had tried to control her, and to develop stronger tools for recognizing and addressing unhealthy dynamics. Both of them were becoming better versions of themselves, not for each other, but for their own healing. And slowly, carefully, they began to rediscover the friendship that had sustained them through childhood and adolescence, building it now on a foundation of mutual respect and healthy boundaries, rather than the unspoken assumptions that had nearly destroyed them both. My family. This part of the story gave me so much hope, and I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to genuinely change and grow for someone you love? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. If stories of real transformation inspire you, and share this with someone who believes in second chances. 15 months after their first careful coffee meeting, Julia and Jordan had successfully rebuilt something precious, a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Their Thursday pizza nights had resumed, but with a different dynamic. Jordan no longer sat possessively close to Julia, and she no longer felt the need to monitor every word for signs of controlling behavior. They talked about their work, their goals, their separate lives, and the growth they'd both experienced during their time apart. Julia had been promoted to senior associate at Harrison & Associates, her reputation stronger than ever after successfully navigating several high-profile cases. Janet Morrison had become more than a mentor. She'd become a trusted friend who'd helped Julia recognize her own worth and develop unshakable boundaries in both professional and personal relationships. Jordan's real estate business had expanded into 3 states, but more importantly, he developed a reputation for ethical development that honored communities rather than displacing them. His therapy sessions had helped him channel his intensity into positive projects, affordable housing initiatives, community development programs, and mentorship for young entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds like his own. During one of their Thursday evenings, Jordan mentioned almost casually that he'd been dating someone, a marketing executive named Lisa, who shared his interest in community development. Julia felt an unexpected stab of something that took her a moment to identify as jealousy. "How's that going?" Julia asked, working to keep her voice neutral. Jordan shrugged, taking a bite of pizza. "She's intelligent, kind, shares similar values. We have good conversations about work and social justice issues." "That sounds promising," Julia said, though something in her chest felt tight. "It is promising," Jordan agreed, "but there's something missing. None of the women I've dated challenge me the way you do. None of them see through my defenses or call me on my nonsense the way you always have. They're attracted to the successful businessman, but they don't really know the kid who used to climb trees to sneak out and comfort his best friend." Julia felt her breath catch. "Jordan, I'm not saying this to pressure you," he added quickly, recognizing the careful boundaries they'd established. "I'm just being honest about what I've learned about myself. The therapy helped me understand that I don't want to settle for someone who only knows part of me. I want someone who knows all of me and still chooses to stay." Julia set down her pizza slice and studied Jordan's face, really looked at him. The desperate possessiveness was gone, replaced by quiet confidence and genuine self-awareness. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, but better. Someone who'd done the hard work of growing and changing. "Jordan, I think I'm ready to try again," she said softly. "But we do this differently this time. We set clear boundaries from the start, and if either of us feels like we're falling into old patterns, we address it immediately." Jordan's eyes lit up with hope tempered by caution. "Are you sure? I wouldn't bear to hurt you again if I haven't changed as much as I think I have." "I'm sure," Julia replied. "But we're different people now. We both learned how to be whole on our own, which means we can choose to be together from a place of strength rather than need." Their second attempt at romance was everything their first should have been. Jordan had learned to love without controlling, and Julia had learned to communicate her needs clearly and immediately. When Julia worked late on important cases, Jordan would send a single supportive text and then busy himself with his own projects rather than tracking her every move. When Jordan had business trips that required long hours, Julia trusted him completely and used the time to nurture her friendships and pursue her own interests. The difference was evident in how Jordan celebrated Julia's professional achievements. When she won a landmark environmental case that would protect Boston Harbor from development, Jordan organized a celebration dinner with all their friends, not to insert himself into her victory, but to honor her accomplishment and share in her joy. He stood beside her as she received congratulations, proud but not possessive, supportive without being suffocating. Julia, in turn, learned to appreciate Jordan's thoughtfulness without feeling controlled by it. When he surprised her with tickets to see her favorite Broadway show during its Boston run, she received the gesture as the loving gift it was, rather than an attempt to monopolize her time. They had learned to give and receive love with open hands rather than clenched fists. 2 years after their reunion, Jordan proposed in the most perfect way possible, not with grand gestures or public displays, but quietly, in the community center of their old neighborhood where they'd first learned to trust each other as children. The venue was decorated simply with flowers from local businesses they'd supported growing up, surrounded by the friends and family who'd watched them grow, fall apart and grow again. Jordan's engagement toast moved everyone to tears. Julia taught me that love isn't about protecting someone from the world, it's about standing beside them as they conquer it. She trusted me with something precious when we were young, and I nearly destroyed it by trying to own her instead of treasuring her. But she also taught me that real love means breaking the cycles that came before us, not repeating them. Julia took the microphone with a radiant smile, her voice strong and clear as she addressed their gathered loved ones. Jordan and I learned that love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who inspires you to become complete on your own, then choosing to build something beautiful together. Sometimes the best love stories are about people who learned to love better. As they danced to Ed Sheeran, The A-Team, the same song that had played at their high school graduation, Julia reflected on their journey. What had started as a simple request between friends had nearly destroyed them, but ultimately taught them both what real partnership looked like. The man holding her now was someone who celebrated her ambitions rather than competing with them, who supported her dreams rather than trying to replace them with his own vision of what was best. Any regrets? Jordan whispered in her ear as they swayed together to the music. Julia smiled, thinking of all the growth and challenges that had brought them to this moment. Only that it took us so long to learn that the best love doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past, it creates something entirely new. But we learned it, Jordan said, spinning her gently. And that's what makes this real. As their friends and family celebrated around them, Julia knew he was absolutely right. They had learned that some things were worth fighting for, not by holding on too tightly, but by learning to love with respect and trust. Jordan had broken the cycle of control that had haunted his family for generations, and together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of their mistakes. Their love story wasn't perfect, but it was real, a testament to the power of growth, forgiveness, and the courage to change. Sometimes the most precious things required losing them first to understand their true value, and sometimes the greatest love stories were written not by people who never made mistakes, but by people who learned to love better because of them. Real love, they had discovered, chooses to stay not out of desperation or fear, but out of genuine respect and admiration. And that kind of love was worth every difficult lesson they'd learned along the way. My dear family, as we're about to close today's journey, Julia and Jordan's story teaches us that love without respect isn't love at all, it's possession. But it also shows us that people can change, that patterns can be broken, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories emerge from the ashes of our worst mistakes. If you're in a relationship where love feels like control, please know that's not normal or healthy. And if you're someone who recognizes controlling tendencies in yourself, Jordan's story shows that change is possible with commitment and professional help. Thank you for trusting me with your time tonight. Your support means everything to me. If you enjoyed this story, quickly hit that subscribe button. Like, comment the moment you felt most in this story, and share with someone who needs to see it. Until next time, remember that you deserve love that lifts you up, not love that holds you down.